Welcome to Healthcare Entrepreneur Academy, where we seek to educate, motivate, and inspire professionals into starting their own healthcare businesses. Learn from leading healthcare entrepreneurs and other business experts as they share their journey and provide a glimpse into their playbooks for success. Loaded with valuable insights and actionable strategies, this show will guide you on your path to freedom. Now, please welcome your host, entrepreneur and healthcare practitioner, Jason Duprat.
Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of the Healthcare Entrepreneur Academy podcast. Today I'm super excited. We have Dr. Arlen Meyers here with us. He is a physician, has his MBA. He's the president and co-founder and CEO of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. He's created several medical devices and digital health companies. Dr. Meyers is a consultant and speaker for companies, governments, as well as colleges and universities around the world in the areas of bioentrepreneurship, bioscience, healthcare, medical tourism, new product development, and financing of new ventures. In addition, Dr. Meyers is a faculty member at the University of Colorado, Denver Graduate School, where he teaches biomedical entrepreneurship. He's authored several books and articles and is the co-editor of Digital Health Entrepreneurship. So welcome, Dr. Meyers. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I'd like to sort of start off the podcast with just an icebreaker where we go a little bit into sort of your background, where you grew up, and what that was like. And did you have any entrepreneurial type influences as you were growing up? And then sort of how you transitioned into entrepreneurship and innovation.
Sure. So I grew up in inner city Philadelphia. My dad was a pharmacist by trade, spent some time during the Second World War, came back, but basically taught pharmacognosy, which for your listeners who might not be familiar with that term, that's the medicinal value of plants. Back in the day, pharmacists used to have that as a required course. And it's kind of ironic with cannabis that now, 60 years later, we're doing the same thing all over again, but that be it as it may. So I had sort of an academic science background when I was growing up, and he was a college professor, but also ran a small business that is a corner drugstore. So when I grew up, my initial work experience as a kid was everything from selling newspapers on the beach in Atlantic City to doing sort of manual labor jobs that I could get, working in the drugstore, that kind of stuff. So I had a fairly traditional career development path, went to college, went to medical school, did a residency in ear, nose, and throat surgery, and subsequently wound up at the University of Colorado, where I was recruited to be basically an academic faculty member. And during my academic tenure as a faculty member, my interest was in head and neck cancer and bioengineering solutions to head and neck cancer. And at one point during my career, myself and several other people invented a gadget that optically detects oral cancer. And without going into the gory details, and we tried to commercialize it, patent it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, at that point, I realized a couple things. One was that pretty much every health professional, scientist, and engineer thinks they have a good idea. Two is they have absolutely no clue what to do with it, including me when I had the idea in terms of commercializing it. Because the third issue is no one's taught how to do that in their formal training. So I said to myself, well, that's not right. And so my career now basically is an attempt to solve that problem.
Awesome. And so let's talk a little bit about that device that you created and sort of what that process looked like. I know a lot of, just like you mentioned, a lot of healthcare professionals come up with ideas, they come up with devices and aren't sure how to get that off the ground. I gather that you've done that a few times, including that initial oral cancer detection device. What are some sort of pearls of wisdom that you have when it comes to creating a device and getting it off the ground and ensuring it's successful?
Well, there are lots and lots of sort of tips on technique and all that other stuff, but I would just kind of showcase or highlight a couple. One is that, in my view, all innovation starts with mindset. So you have to have the right mindset to know whether this is something you should do. I don't need to tell you, it's very hard and it takes a long time and there's a lot of roadblocks. And so if you're just not cut out to do this, you shouldn't do it. You should just see patients or do whatever you're doing. Science, and just do what you were trained to do and just forget about this entrepreneurship stuff. It's a total waste of time of your life and of other people's lives that you're going to engage for no good reason. So what does that mean? So how would you know whether you had an entrepreneurial mindset or not? And basically, it's how you see the world. There's a lot of literature, there are tests, there are personality inventories, et cetera, that you could do. But fundamentally, it's about, do you have the knowledge, skills, abilities, and competencies that typify an entrepreneurial mindset before you go down this road? So that's tip number one. Figure out whether you have what it takes. Look in the mirror. And again, if you are a health professional or a scientist or a bioengineer or someone involved in this, it's unlikely that you were chosen to go into that professional domain because you were an innovative or creative genius. You got in because you were able to get good grades in school. You were able to do well in competitive standardized tests. You said exactly what the interviewer wanted you to say. You knew how to, you crossed the T's and dot the I's. You understood the hidden curriculum. You probably came from a background where social determinants of your educational outcome were in your favor. Some would call it the ovary lottery. So you have to kind of understand, do you have what it takes? And I would say about 15 to 20% of it is nature, and the rest is nurture. So the second point is, any personality, anyone with a personality, whatever it is, Myers-Briggs or Enneagram or all the personality inventories, can do this. That doesn't make any difference. The bad news is your personality is fixed when you're about 15 or 16. The good news is that your mindset can be changed. So even though you got into science, technology, engineering, medicine, whatever, without actually thinking that you had an entrepreneurial mindset, that doesn't mean you don't, or that it can't be changed. So I think that's the real foundation of all of this. And actually and then the nuts and bolts and the blocking and tackling of what you have to do to get a drug, a device, an in vitro diagnostic, a digital health idea to a patient. That's just a process that is learning. And fundamentally, the second tip is, what got you to where you are now will not get you to where you want to go. So what you did to become an anesthesiologist or a ketamine infusion center director will not get you to where you want to go if you want to pursue entrepreneurship in a different direction. So you're going to need education, resources, networks, mentors, experience, peer-to-peer support, and alternative career development to do that. And finally, I would say that a lot of times people describe the entrepreneurial roadmap. In fact, I wrote a book called The Healthcare Innovation Roadmap. And it was brought to my attention, and I subsequently realized that it isn't a roadmap. It's not a clear delineation of, here's the sign that tells you where to exit. It's really more like a treasure hunt. So you get this map that has clues. And whether that's customer discovery, whether it's experimentation, whether it's brainstorming. So the ability to get from A to B is knowing how to set up experiments and look for the clues and do something with them. It's not a linear A to B to C to D process.
Yeah, you made some really good points there for sure. Nursing school, medical school, a lot of the healthcare professions, as you're moving through those programs and moving into the job force, it's a lot more black and white than innovation or entrepreneurship is for sure. I mean, you're memorizing facts a lot of the times. You're following a very set standardized plan to get through those programs. And so it's definitely, I 100% agree, a completely different skill set in order to be successful as an entrepreneur, because you're not going to have that specific exact roadmap that you're going to be following. You're going to be figuring things out as you go along the way. And it's definitely challenging. So if you don't have the grit right off the bat, you're going to be struggling for sure. I think grit is one of the big personal characteristics to get people through all those tough times that you come across as an entrepreneur.
Well, I'll make two other points. One is to your first point. If the healthcare, or what I call the sick care system, it's not a healthcare system, it's a sick care system.
Absolutely.
Because we just take care of sick people. 96% of the money is spent taking care of sick people. If you expect healthcare or sick care professionals to innovate, which seems to be the mantra of every single healthcare institution in the world these days, it is cruel and unusual punishment to not train them differently. It's just not fair to expect people like you and people like me to go through a program that emphasizes conformity and evidence-based adherence, while at the same time saying, but we want you to innovate and we want you to think outside the guardrails. It just doesn't work. Not only that, if you say we're going to go from fee-for-service to value-based, it's not right to say we're going to pay you to deliver value, but we're not going to teach you how to create it. So what's supposed to happen? You throw a bunch of stuff on the wall and you get paid if it works? It just doesn't make sense. Bottom line, we need to rethink education at the graduate level and at the medical level.
If you were able to develop your own sort of curriculum, what would be the curriculum that you have? I would guess it maybe some of the similar things that you're doing with with your Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. What are some of the key elements that are missing right now? Because you're right, I think absolutely it's very conformity based. There's actually you actually get chastised if you come up with some creative ideas or new solutions.
It's a toxic educational. I don't need to tell you. Mm-hmm. It's a toxic educational environment. Now, are there places that are trying to make a difference? Yes. Is every place horrible? No. Do people come out of medical school being reasonable people? Yes. But I'm just saying, in the aggregate, we need to rethink it. Mm-hmm. And if you're asking me, so what would you do? Well, assessment. And if the goal is to graduate people, and the simple way that I put this is, my goal would be to graduate people who can win the fourth industrial revolution and serve the needs of their community in doing so. So you may or may not be familiar with that mental model of the fourth industrial revolution, but it's basically what drives economies. First one was water. Second one was electricity mass production. Third one was the computer. And now we're in a cyber intelligence driven world. So how do you train people to win that revolution as professionals? So it starts with the goal. What are you trying to accomplish in the educational system? Then it starts with a needs assessment. What does the market demand? And what do individuals demand? All the stakeholders in higher ed, such that we can listen to them and basically design a curriculum. Then the curriculum, the learning objectives flow from that. And the learning objectives, of course, are related to what I just said. What do you need to know and do and think and feel and act to win the fourth industrial revolution? And then you fill in the curriculum and you structure the process, not just the content. It has to be the structure. We're presently in a medical education system that was designed in the 1890s. And we're trying to win the fourth industrial revolution in 2020. My suggestion is that we have a second Flexner report, which redid medical education in the late 1800s, early 1900s. There's obviously a lot of detail, and I can go on forever about this, but that's the answer.
Yeah. And I think we're on the same page with that for sure. Not just in medical schools, but a variety of healthcare professionals could all use a revamp of their curriculums and the way that they're educating.
And I would just say that as a very simple first pass, every medical student should have a mandatory course in digital health. What
would be your definition of digital health?
As you know, there are lots of different ones. Mine is the use of information and the application of information and communication technologies to exchange medical information. Mm-hmm. It's a large category that has several subsegments: telemedicine, electronic medical records, big data analytics, AI, machine, all that stuff. And so they're different subsegments. And the basic idea, and again, I draw the analogy using doctor language, that medical students should be exposed to the basic science of digital health, which means data literacy. And they should be exposed to the anatomy and physiology of it. How's it built and how's it work? And they should be exposed to the clinical science. What do you use it for and does it work?
Mm-hmm.
That's what the curriculum would look like.
Gotcha. Very interesting. I love it. Love to see that happen sometime in the near future.
It is happening. And I can give you several examples of stuff we've been involved with in other universities.
Awesome.
People are beginning to understand and to get this. So they're starting to roll out like certificates, courses, preclinical, et cetera, fellowships, residents, all kinds of stuff. So the good news is it's happening, but it's going to take a while to figure it out.
Yeah, for sure. I've noticed there's a big, huge uptick in healthcare organizations hiring chief innovation officers to sort of lead the way on some of this stuff. And what's your take on that? Have you had a lot of experience with people that are in those roles?
So in fact, a couple items with chief innovation officers. First of all, you have to define innovation. Secondly, and what that looks like and what's this person supposed to do. Secondly, there is no chief innovation officer school. There is no chief medical officer for a digital health startup school. So basically what we're doing is we're taking people typically who have MD after their name, who have some clinical credibility in the system, who may have some credentials or kudos or whatever, having been there, done that, and we make them the chief innovation officer. The unfortunate reality in my observation is that most of that is innovation theater that results in very little for the amount that goes in. And there's 2 or 3 basic reasons why that happens. One is, as I indicated, you have to engage innovators who have an entrepreneurial mindset, of which about 1% to 2% of doctors do. So you're starting with a relatively small pool of people for the reasons we just mentioned. Number 2, you have to create a culture of innovation that's sustainable, and you have to engage A with B. So the people with the entrepreneurial mindset have to play nice in a culture and a sandbox of a culture of innovation. And then you have to have the structure, process, leadership, tactics, strategy to execute. The problem is not that there aren't enough problems to solve. The problem is not that there aren't enough good ideas to solve them. The problem is, how do you execute them? So there's a lot of work to be done. And frankly, I think most innovation centers fail. And consequently, most chief innovation officers fail because that structure, process, and outcome is not thought through.
Yeah, that makes perfectly good sense. Execution is definitely.
And incidentally,
key.
I'll put a shameless plug. I work at the University of Colorado, as you mentioned, but I also teach in the business school. And we're actually conceptualizing an exec ed program in healthcare innovation execution. There's a ton of stuff out there on theory. The problem is getting it done. And what are the tools that you need to do it? How do you run experiments? How do you analyze the data? How do you play nice with each other? How do you get the resources inside? What are the leadership skills, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really what we're working on.
Awesome. I love it. You're doing great things for sure. So I want to kind of circle back to sort of your first device that you created, the oral cancer detection device, and sort of walk us through the next step in that journey. What happened to that product? And
Yep. So here's what happened and here's what I learned. You learn lots more from failures than successes. And I have a failure resume just like you should.
Oh, yeah.
And so on my failure resume is this thing didn't work out. I wouldn't call it a loss or a win. I would call it a tie. And I'll tell you why. So we went through the process. Now, since I was am an academic faculty person, you have to deal with the intricacies of academic technology transfer and who owns the intellectual property and da-da-da-da-da. So we went through all that, which is a little bit different in each place. And then we got sort of sideways with the intellectual property because there were some other people in the same university working on similar technologies that were sort of confounding the patent portfolio. Long story short, we concocted this device, we filed the patent work, And basically it wound up, and still to my knowledge, the patent resides in a commercial technology commercialization house in Boston. So if we wanted to, we could actually go. Now, this was 10, 15 years ago. So by this time, the technology's changed and that was old news, and we'd have to kind of revisit the whole thing. But the lessons that I learned, so what did I learn from that experience? You really kind of need to understand the lay of the land where you're working. You need to understand, again, sort of the intricacies of reimbursement, of intellectual property, of regulatory affairs, all that sort of not blocking and tackling stuff. But the single biggest thing I learned is don't work with people that don't have a common sense of urgency or who you don't trust. And my little snippet on that is, if you are going to do this, you need to make it personal, but don't take it personally. So what that means is that this journey is very, very hard and long and arduous and riddled with potential failure. And you mentioned grit and perseverance and resilience and all that. If you don't have that little voice in your head telling you, do this, get over it, brush yourself off, you will fail. Even if you have it, you will fail. The likelihood of your being successful is extremely low. But if you're going to continue down this, you have to have that little personal voice. Now, in medicine, a lot of that comes from, for example, parents who have a kid with an orphan disease, and they say, well, gee, he's not getting any better. The doctors don't know what the hell they're doing, so I'm going to figure something out to help my kid. Or I have diabetes and I don't like the stuff that's out there, so I'm going to invent my own artificial pancreas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you have to have a hook. You have to have something that is whispering in your ear to tell you to keep going. Now, that's the make it personal part. The don't take it personally part means the large statistical probability is you will fail. So when you fail, don't take it personally. It's business. It's what happens. It's the nature of entrepreneurship. Get up and do something different.
Awesome. That's phenomenal advice. I love it. Make it personal and don't take it personally.
Right.
Great words of wisdom right there. Now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. This episode is sponsored by my free presentation for the Ketamine Academy. If you're tired of long hours, constantly being on call, or having to give up your nights, weekends, and holidays, all for an employer that only thinks of you as a productivity number that they're trying to maximize, then it's time to break free from the hospital grind, become your own boss, and finally take control of your professional trajectory. It's time you start your own practice. I know it sounds really scary, maybe even a little impossible. I get it. You got student loans, you're working tons of hours, and you may not even be a physician. Well, I am here to tell you that it's absolutely possible. Starting my own clinic was exactly how I started my healthcare entrepreneur career. And there's one specific type of clinic that almost anybody can open. Ketamine therapy is one of the most promising treatments in the fight against depression, PTSD, and chronic pain that we've ever seen. And thousands of patients across the country are looking for clinics in their area. The problem is that there aren't enough yet. And these patients need someone like you to open a ketamine practice in your hometown. Go to ketamineacademy.com/presentation for a no-cost 60-minute training on how to gain more freedom by opening up your own clinic. On the presentation, you'll discover why opening your own private clinic is a better decision than working more overtime or going back to school for another degree, why this one specific niche clinic is the easiest to open and doesn't require a bunch of cash to start, and how anyone can open this type of clinic, even if you're not a physician, by just following a few simple steps. So to register for this free training, just go to ketamineacademy.com/presentation. Now let's get back to the show. So when it comes to that device and sort of that, so that didn't really pan out. That's something I've learned a lot about recently, is all the IP problems that go along with working with universities or even your employer in some cases. A lot of times, if you're doing anything on the clock for them, even sometimes off the clock, which is even crazier, that sometimes they just can take over your ideas and claim ownership.
And that's an interesting point, because as just a side note, that as more and more residents or nurses or other health professionals become employees of hospital systems, when they sign up and they're asked to look at an employment contract, one of the things they should ask in this day and age, if they're interested in this, is who owns the IP? What happens when I come up with an idea and I tell you about it? And that really wasn't an issue several years ago because not that many people really work for, other than academics.
Mm-hmm.
But now there's so many people working for hospital systems that are interested in this innovation gig that you have to sort all that out. And the first question usually is, how much are you going to pay me? The second question is, what are the benefits and how much time off and call do I need to take? But maybe the third question should be, what happens if I invent something?
Yeah, definitely something important to take into consideration for sure. What would you like? Is that negotiable, or did some
everything's negotiable?
Mm-hmm.
It's called a contract,
mm-hmm.
and whether it's a letter of interest that an employer sends you, or whether it's a formal contract negotiation for employment, you're really not doing yourself a favor going in blind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because you know what's going to happen. It's, now you're going to invent something or come up with an idea and say, gee, I thought that was my idea. No. You work for us. You have assigned your rights to the intellectual property to us, and you're basically an at-will employee.
Mm-hmm.
So we can fire you if you want. We're going to take your idea.
Yeah. Yeah, super important to look into those details for sure. And good to know that everything's negotiable, which makes sense. It's like a Donald Trump quote, I think. He's got a quote, something like that. Yeah. Cool. So when it comes to your next sort of either product move or business move, what came after that first device that you were looking at creating?
So then I got involved in concocting several other medical devices,
mm-hmm.
Specifically in terms of gadgets that I would use in surgery or other people might want to use in surgery. But then the whole digital health wave happened. And so then I got sidetracked and started getting involved working with companies and that were developing and deploying digital health ideas. And it brings up another point with physician or health professional entrepreneurship, and that is, I mentioned that one of the early things you want to do is determine whether you have an entrepreneurial mindset. The second is you really want to determine where you want to play. And so I call that the roles, holes, and goals. So the roles mean, what role do you want to play in the process? Do you want to be an edupreneur? Do you want to be a consultant? Do you want to be the founder? Do you want to be a chief technology officer? What role in the process do you want to play? The holes have to do with, what problem do you want to solve? What hole do you want to fill? And that typically has to do with choosing a specific industry. That means drugs, devices, diagnostics, digital health, care delivery, educational technologies, fintech, wherever you want to play. But once you decide the roles and the holes you want to fill, then the goals should pretty much be the same regardless of which you choose. Improve quality, reduce cost, improve the provider and user experience, improve administrative efficiencies, and reduce waste. And those are all commonalities of what we're trying to accomplish in physician or health promotion entrepreneurship. The misconception is that entrepreneurship is about creating a company. It is not. It is one way. What entrepreneurship is about is creating user-defined value through the deployment of innovation using a viable business model. One way to do that is to create a company. Another way to do it is to create a model. Another way to do it is to create a unique pricing thing. There's a million different ways to do it, but we're doing ourselves a disservice by promoting entrepreneurship as teaching people how to create companies. It's just not a valid metric.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you make there, and something I hadn't really given much thought to until you just brought it up. But yeah, that's absolutely true. It's not just about creating a business. It's about creating value in some form or the other. And you can make a business out of it for sure, but
if we're going to transform sick care to healthcare,
mm-hmm.
which to me is the answer for the mess that we're in, we can't do that telling people, go create companies. That's not going to get us there. Because at the very end, we're all in this to try to help patients. And the only thing that matters is the ultimate delivery of patient-defined value.
Yeah, I love that. I love that concept for sure. So you got involved with several other devices. Is there any other pearls of wisdom that you learned from working on those situations or those devices? And then if you could just walk us through sort of the next thing that you did entrepreneurial wise. I know that at some point you created the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. So I'd love to hear about that as well.
Okay. So I'll tell you two more stories. So the first story is, so I got into this device gig and, digital health and all that other business. So what I learned, and another tip is, when you get into this, it's about fail it, nail it, scale it, and sail it. So what that means is that in the very beginning, you're going to run a series of experiments to figure this out. Product market fit, business model, blah, blah, blah. And the large majority of the time it will fail. The experiment will indicate to you that your assumption was not valid. It's like the scientific method. So you're essentially running the scientific method. You have a hypothesis, you design an experiment, you collect the data, you analyze the data, and you decide, do you accept or reject the null hypothesis? In other words, did what I just do make any difference? And most of the time it's going to be no. So then you got to go back, like in a science lab, then you got to reformulate the experiment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You go through all these iterations. Finally, you get onto something. You say, gee, maybe penicillin does kill bacteria. Now you got to figure out a way. So to nail that concept, you have to create product market fit. You got to figure out who the customer is, all that other stuff, lean startup methodology. So you go from fail it to nail it. Once you've nailed it and you figured out, okay, I have a business model that probably will work and is scalable, then you need to scale it. So you go from fail it to nail it to scale it. And sometimes people forget the last part, and that's to exit or to sail it. So you start with the end in mind, and you figure out, why am I doing this, and what's the end strategy? So you have to kind of think along those different. Now, that process I just described could take your entire life.
Yeah.
Or if you're lucky, it could take 18 months. These ridiculous paper napkin to exit in 18 months and you make $1 gazillion. It happens, but it's pretty uncommon. Most of the time, it takes a fairly long time to get this stuff done. I've been at this for God knows how long. I've been doing it forever. So it takes a while. So I would give you that point. The second is, again, an example of entrepreneurship that is not about creating a company is social entrepreneurship. So we created, again, in the very beginning of this conversation, I said the problem we're trying to solve, good idea, don't know what to do with it, no training. So we created the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs to fix that. It's a nonprofit. So in that role, I'm a social entrepreneur. I'm trying to improve the human condition. Our mission is to get ideas to patients. And the reason we want to get ideas to patients is the vision, which is close global health outcome disparities. It's kind of like world peace and get rid of poverty and food security, all these big, hairy goals and all that. But you got to give it a shot. So that's what we're trying to do. So in my role as this is the president and CEO, I am a social entrepreneur growing this organization around the world to try to make an international impact. That has nothing to do with creating a company. However, it does have something to do with creating a company, because if you run a nonprofit, it's not going to be around very long if you don't structure it using a viable business model. In other words, you got to run it like a business.
Yeah, exactly.
No margin, no mission.
Yep.
So the skills are interchangeable, but the vision and the process is a little bit different, and the motivation is a little bit different.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing I think healthcare providers or practitioners struggle with is the whole profit thing, and not really. Have you come across that where a lot of medical professionals are they shy away from talking about money or income or profit margins? What's your take on that? That's been something I've come across.
So my take on that is, this business of doctors are lousy business people is really stupid. It's a myth, and it's perpetuated by people who benefit from perpetuating the myth. It frankly is not true. I deal with people day in and day out, and there's a long history of medical innovation by people who were terrific business people and created an enormous amount of value. So don't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that part of the problem is that docs have been so brainwashed and acculturated, they believe it. So that's why you have relatively few people with an entrepreneurial mindset. They've been taught to believe that money is dirty, that medicine is not a business, that the reason they went into medicine was to take care of patients and don't bother me with the business stuff. I'm sorry, it's a business. Even in centralized, I'm not talking about countries that have a single payer. This has nothing to do with England versus United States. Wherever medicine is practiced and has been forever, it has always been about generating a profit to satisfy the mission. I don't care if you were driving a buggy in central Kansas in 1820, you had to make a buck in order to do it. Now, of course, times have changed and things are different, but that's the reality. So you have to understand and accept that fact. It is not dirty. There are ways of, however, there is a difference, and the challenge is, how do you reconcile the ethics and professionalism of medicine with the ethics and professionalism of business? I call it compassionate capitalism. Every doctor, health professional I know has taken care of someone for free and continues to do it. They can't do it forever. They can't do it at scale, but they do it. I don't know a whole lot of folks in a grocery store who let me walk out with a whole bunch of stuff for free.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
It's a different thing. So you have to reconcile the two, and there are ways of doing it.
Mm-hmm. That was a phenomenal explanation and description of sort of what medical professionals feel like. And it's so true that you have to make some sort of profit. Otherwise, you'll never be able to continue on delivering value to patients, taking care of patients, delivering on your mission statement. There has to be funding from somewhere. And unless you're going to just collect charitable donations to stay in operation, you've got to make a profit. And there is a business component to everything that you're doing.
It's another reason why I think medical schools are practicing educational malpractice by not offering, call it what you want, innovation, entrepreneurship, business of medicine, whatever. Your ability to negotiate the business environment will have more to do with your practice success than the next drug you're going to prescribe for depression, with all due respect to what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's phenomenal advice. So just when it comes to starting a nonprofit, what does that process look like? You've gone through that whole process, right. And yeah.
Well, again, we teach actually a whole course and like how to do this, but the bottom line is there's 23 different IRS codes under the nonprofit section. So the first thing is you have to figure out, what are you trying to accomplish? What problem are you trying to solve? Is it world peace? Is it to get more first generation college kids to graduate? Is it food insecurity? I mean, the list is endless given all the problems that plague humanity. So you got to figure out what you're trying to do. And then the process actually is not too different from creating a product, which is who's the customer? Who are the stakeholders? Where's their pain? Who's going to pay? What are the partners that you need? What's the revenue model? How much is it going to cost, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the names are a little bit different. For example, a customer in a business would be a beneficiary in a nonprofit. Mm-hmm. So in my case, I create a digital health app. The customer is going to be a patient that uses it. I create SoPE. The beneficiary ultimately is going to be the patient who benefits from the deployment of innovation by health professionals. Mm-hmm. So that's how you think this thing through.
Yeah.
And then there's a whole bunch of nuts and bolts you have to do just to get the damn thing to run and scale. Mm-hmm. So we started this thing in 2011. Our mission, as I stated, is to help members get their ideas to patients or help someone who wants to get an idea to a patient. It's an open innovation network. Anybody can join. You don't have to be a health professional, which is another tip and a word of wisdom I would give people, or a word of whatever you want to call it, is sick care cannot be fixed from inside. So you have to engage other industry people, aerospace, biotech, media, telecom, you name it. And if you just look at every industry, I don't care what it is, it's very unusual for an industry to reinvent itself from the inside. And medicine's a perfect example. Telemedicine was not invented by some brilliant doctor. It was invented by some techie who created radio and video and television, and it was applied to medicine. GPS and digital health tracking was not created by some brilliant doctor at Hopkins. It was created by some scientist at NASA and the DOD that was applied to medicine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So I say, if you want to go find innovation in medicine, you're not going to find it at the next meeting of the American Society of Ketamine Physicians.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to find it at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas.
Yeah, I love that mentality for sure. And that's sort of what my goal was, and the mission was with this podcast, is to bring all of like a large variety of healthcare professionals together. I see that everything's really segmented in that there's nursing organizations, there's chiropractor organizations, there's physician organizations, and I didn't see anyone where like one organization bringing everybody together to sort of collaborate. And I love that you're allowing non-healthcare professionals in there as well, which is just a great idea.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. And that's why we started it as an open network to begin with. Mm-hmm. Actually, yesterday, I had a conversation with a group of massage therapists, mm-hmm. and we're trying to figure out how do we get them in the game.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not interested in them figuring out it's an important concept. How do you integrate that into traditional medical practice or vice versa? Integrative medicine, alternative complementary, blah, blah. My shtick is innovation. So I want to see how the massage therapy business can reinvent itself. Because frankly, me going someplace to a massage therapist, a brick and mortar facility, and paying them for that is not the model I want. Mm-hmm. Just like patients don't want that in medicine anymore. So I'm trying to get them to think a little bit differently about new models, new revenue, alternative treatment modalities, how do you integrate, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
so
I love it.
That's why we include these different modalities.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So we're winding down here already. It's already been just about 45 minutes. I want to give you a chance to let everybody know how they can reach out to you, how they can learn more about SoPE, the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs.
Sure.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you go to www.sopenet.org. SoPEnet's one word, and you sign up. And it costs $80 a year. And we have chapters all over the world. And you go to the chapter meetings for free when you're a member. It's like a magazine subscription. And when you go to these meetings, what you are going to experience are two basic things: networking and connecting dots with people that you ordinarily wouldn't connect to. And secondly, education, because during every meeting, we have somebody give up an informational or educational presentation. It's not a sales pitch. It's not a solicitation for money. It's not an infomercial. It's a way to educate you about what other members are doing and what they're thinking.
Awesome. I love it. I'm going to sign up right when we get off of this this podcast. I really love what you guys are doing. It's great stuff. And you can be found on LinkedIn, right? I see you've got a really solid LinkedIn presence.
Yeah, I'm all over I'm all over social media. So if you can't find me on social media, there's something wrong with your bandwidth.
Right. Awesome. So thanks again for joining us on the podcast, Dr. Meyers. This is a real pleasure to speak to you. I will be seeing you at one of these upcoming SoPE meetings for sure.
Perfect.
And I look forward to connecting with you in person.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you later.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Healthcare Entrepreneur Academy. Want to connect with more like-minded healthcare entrepreneurs and professionals? Just head over to jasonduprat.com/group to join our Facebook family for real-time interactions, insight, and resources to get you one step closer to realizing your goal. We look forward to interacting with you, but until then, we'll catch you on the next episode of the Healthcare Entrepreneur Academy.